So, hi, it's Chris Murdock with IQTalent, bringing you another episode of Recruiting Connections with me, Chris Murdock. So, I want to welcome my guest, Devoreaux. Devoreaux, please introduce yourself and let us, give us an idea of why we're talking today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today, Chris. Happy to meet you all out there in the world. I am Devoreaux Walton, managing partner at DEI Talent Partners. We are a Black-owned, woman-owned national boutique talent management consulting firm. We specialize in diversity, equity, and inclusion, best practices for talent attraction, development, and retention. Really excited to be here today.
Awesome. Well, this is the word association test. What does connection, how does connection play in your practice and what you do with your clients?
Absolutely. So connection is very important when we think about people practices and the culture of organizations. Connection really starts from the moment that two people are having an engagement. It could be an email, it could be a conversation, it could be a video chat, whatever the form of communication or method that connection is initially established, right? And so it's crucially important to have a level of empathy and connection, to be able to have a level of intention and connection, and really think about, the value that can be added at either side of the table, whether you are a candidate in the process or you're a hiring manager, if you're a people manager, interacting with your team, whatever role and function that you play in. It's very important to think about that value add and serving and intention when you're making those connections and having that communication with others.
You brought up empathy and intention. That's unique. I mean, the empathy part is it's always got to be there, but the intention, can you expand upon why that's important?
Absolutely. So when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, the intention is quite crucial when we look at systemic success and outcomes. So a lot of organizations really just want to have a strategy. They want to put a social media post up. They want to have an event. They want to wear t-shirts and pass out bumper stickers. But before any action really should be taken, it's so paramount that intention is given. What is our intention? What are we trying to accomplish here? Where is the thought process and the mindset behind what we're trying to establish and do? And so intention in connection, intention in this work, it is really so important. It drives everything that we do, and that certainly has a very large impact on the outcomes that we see from what we're doing in this space.
And I think, and you've probably we've experienced it with some of our clients where it was lip service. They just wanted to say they were being, putting in DEI initiatives, but when push comes to shove, they weren't investing. They didn't clearly identify how the initiatives would assist in recruitment, from employment branding, from retention. What bias, how can you fix broken system if you don't even understand what biases exist in the existing system? So where do you usually start? Because it's that why. You got to understand why. The intention is why. Why are we going to do this? And then you got the what needs to be done, and then okay, how are we going to get it done? How do you start?
Yeah.
How do you start? How do you help them understand how do you help them understand without them getting defensive about what they've been and help them understand who they want to be?
Yeah, so it really helps as a first step, Chris, to start looking at taking an inventory of where things currently are. What are the problems? What is the feedback that you've received, or what are some of the perceived problems that you, your colleagues, your team have realized or noticed along the way? And so from there, that conversation really expands to, okay, so what is the desire of where you want to be as a culture, when you think about the level of representation that you have, when you look at employee engagement data, what are those outcomes, and where is that desired state? And then we look at the gap and figure out how to get there. A lot of companies just want to do a DEI audit or just start doing diversity recruiting. Diversity recruiting is not the first place for someone to start when there are multiple layered issues. So I think it really goes back to intention being part of the huge foundation. And that's one of the core values at DEI Talent Partners, because it really is important that organizations are thinking about the big picture, and they're looking at long-term sustainable systemic success and systemic pivot and change. Because a quick fix, a band-aid, oh, let's hire a woman or a person of color in this C-level position, that's not necessarily going to have a whole lot of sustainable impact when there are systems and policies in place that are biased, that have discrimination. So that's really the first place to start.
Yeah, I've had to, oftentimes, I have to, I ask the question when we are asked to help find a diverse slate of candidates. I always ask the clients, what's that mean? What does diversity mean to you? And that usually leads to a much longer conversation. And we don't necessarily get to the kickoff, because we have to understand what does diversity mean? And sometime in one instance, a client had a very unhealthy sales team, lots of unhealthy competition, and they said, oh, we got to fix the diversity problem. And it turns out they were only hiring like type A athletes. And so there was no diversity of background. There was no diversity of thought. You had a very diverse group of people, but they all had one thing in common. They wanted to compete with each other. It created an unhealthy environment. And it turns out that the hiring managers kept hiring people like themselves, D1 student athletes right out of college. And it created a super toxic environment. And as soon as we were able to identify, like, why do you have 100% of your team as student athletes? That's not diversity. So those little things. How do you help how do you connect the dots, with your clients, like helping them identify those gaps? Or in like this case, how would you have gone about like identifying that blind spot?
Yeah, so it certainly has to start, the conversation has to be started by establishing that there is a safe space. It's really about making sure that people feel comfortable to be transparent. And when we start to do audits or focus groups, we make sure that if people have the desire to maintain their anonymous status, then we don't necessarily share that when we're starting to have those conversations, because it really takes information gathering at the transparent level to see what is really going on within an organization, how things are transpiring, the interactions, the dynamics, and that can't happen if we're on the outside. So we have to come in, we have to have that safe space foundation in order to really start to see where those gaps are, and being able to look at the employee data, being able to have honest conversations. And if someone is in a fallen on their sword moment, they are very grateful that we are not here to attack. We're simply just asking questions, information gathering. We're not there to chastise, and no one's being, punished. It's really looking at how can we take a pulse on where things currently are for the opportunity to improve them for the future.
Yeah, I mean, when you bring up DEI initiatives with certain populations that watch certain channels or in certain echo chambers, their first instinct is to get defensive. And I think making them, creating an environment where they can talk about how they're feeling, I think that helps them overcome a lot of things and answering the questions and defining things. Now we often talk about, in our pre-conversation, we talked a little bit about, DEI B. The B was recently brought to my attention about 3-4 months ago, and it's really helped me overcome a lot of those issues. What's your take on B? And you also mentioned another aspect to it that I think is also incredibly important.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking about that, Chris. So I'll just do an overview, if you will, of all the letters. I know that different organizations will implement them differently, but from a practitioner level, there are definitely certain standards that we have in place in order to make sure that we are all kind of marching to the same beat, if you will. So diversity is really looking at a broad set of people based on the uniqueness that they may bring. I don't like to necessarily use the word difference. So when we think about people and the identity dimensions that they subscribe to, really could be a variety of different things based on their age, their background, sexual orientation. Of course, we always talk about gender and race. But beyond that, religious beliefs and lifestyle and culture and so many other things that really intertwine to make us all individual dynamic beings. So diversity is really about who is invited to the party. And so then we have inclusion, and inclusion is really about making sure that everyone at the party, if you will, feels respected, that they have this sense of making sure that they can participate, they can speak up, they don't have to be a wallflower at the party, but they can, be included. And then we think about equity, and equity is really my favorite thing. Equity is looking at policies, programs, systems, and practices to see what is really not on the same level. So historically, we know for a fact that people of color have been disadvantaged in a myriad of ways, from healthcare to education to wealth, access to so many different resources. And so when we think about someone saying, well, to be successful in your career, you just have to work really hard. That's not what equity looks like. And being able to have different policies and programs that can adapt the requirements or adapt the types of support that are given to disadvantaged groups helps to level that playing field, right? So equity is really my favorite thing, and that's truly my passion. So the term that you brought up, belonging, is really about people being able to have this sense of security, this sense of support, and really this sense of acceptance, like they can fully be authentic in who they are and how they show up. So it's someone who may have an accent and doesn't feel the need to suppress their accent. And it's so amazing to me when I watch actors who have a native accent and they can lose it just at the drop of a dime on a television show or a movie. Another example is, for people who need to pray multiple times a day, and being able to speak up and say something to their supervisor or their colleagues at work, or block time, just being able to be authentically who you are. A personal story about myself is that for the majority of my life, I was wearing my hair in a straight way, and straightening my hair, I never consciously thought about how it was really a form of assimilation, but unconsciously it certainly was. And so now for me to wear, curly hair is an example of me being able to show up as my authentic self. The new letter that has recently been added is J for justice. And justice is about dismantling those barriers so that resources and opportunities can be available for everyone to fully participate and fully thrive. So, within the workplace, we have seen some some forms of improvement when we look at the last several decades. But, Chris, frankly, we have a very long way to go, especially if
Mhm.
we're only looking at Fortune 500s, right? The shiny red apples, the positive bright spots within the corporate marketplace. And so there's a lot of work to be done here.
There's five things that I want to reiterate that you said, and thank you so much for defining everything. It all comes down to empathy, respect, creating a level playing field where people can feel authentic in who they are, and ensuring that that level playing field stays the same, that it stays level long term. What you put in place today, yes, there will be adaptations, things will change, environments change, uh, but making sure that from a justice perspective, it sounds like making sure that you're not just making them for today, you're making these changes for tomorrow.
Yeah, well, it's really hard work, Chris. And this
I
is
know.
why
Yeah.
this is my passion,
Yeah.
because this is what we need in order to see sustainable long-term progress. We need equity, we need justice.
Hmm.
And it's frankly something a lot of companies don't want to do, to change policies and programs to level that playing field. That is the next level. That's more than just putting a woman CEO in charge, or finding a person of color. Equity is really where people put their money where their mouth is when they're making those changes.
Yeah. And I that's again, it comes down to, if you're going to invest so much time and money and emotions, this is a very emotional topic. This is an emotional thing. And I can only imagine, like how, like at the end of each day, how satisfied you are, but also how tired you can be. How do you help your clients, how do you help them anticipate the challenges that, that it's important for them to do this? How do you help them anticipate how do you help them get to where they understand what to expect through the process?
Yeah, so one of the things I like to talk about is the different stages within the journey of DEI, because there are certainly different places that different organizations are at. And one thing that's helpful to frame when we have this context conversation is the fact that it is a journey. There is not a ending destination. There's no end point. We don't get to a spot on the road and just park and we're done.
Mhm.
There's always room for improvement. I mean, we all have bias. We all live in a society that continues to, well, at least within America, shove certain ideas down our throat every time we turn on the TV, watch a commercial, listen to the radio. And so that's what we are living in. We're living in this chaotic zone that is not necessarily going to have equity or diversity or inclusion or justice at the forefront. So considering the fact that it is a journey and you are on a particular spot and in a particular place right now, you're going to progress as you move along, but it does take time.
Mhm.
And so there's a variety of resources that we do share, books and other things that are really helpful to continue adding that level of support along the way. One thing personally that I do is, I'm a person of faith, so I believe in God and I'm a Christian. I really lean on my faith quite a bit when there are certain situations that just feel very heavy. And so for some people, spirituality is really helpful. And for others, it's really just about a sense of prioritizing mental health, meditating, taking breaks, taking walks, having safe space conversations to have someone to share your feelings and what's going on, and just have a opportunity to unload so that you're not carrying it all on your own.
Yeah, good. Sometimes things can seem really daunting when you have a really big challenge, and patience comes into play. Patience and
Absolutely.
understanding and tolerance. A funny bias thing that, so I live in Tennessee, moved here from California. People who live in certain parts of Tennessee have made up their mind about people from California. And so I told this one person that I'm a Christian. And they're like, but you're from California. And I said, yeah, I'm a Christian. I go to church. My daughter does, we go to a United Methodist church, and I said my daughter serves communion from time to time, and I said yeah, I go to church, and they go, but you're from California, and this went on, and I'm like, okay, what do you think people from California are? Aren't you all atheists? And I was like, no. So that was a rather interesting, eye-opening experience for that person to understand not everybody from California is an atheist. There's some, I'm sure, but that's fine. And so even, it's we had a good laugh about it. And I've had really good conversations, and the person goes to our church today. So like it was rather eye-opening for this person to have a bias exposed and then explained in a way. How does humor play into this at all? In trying to help people from getting defensive, because you're holding a mirror up to people and organizations and even teams. Like you've got diversity could mean something different in HR. It can mean something different in sales and engineering and all that. How do you get maybe one group's doing a really good job, another group's not? How do you manage that without people getting defensive? And do you use humor at all to help understand that bias exists in the weirdest of ways?
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's really helpful when teaching foundational concepts in this work is to give examples, to make it practical, to make it relatable. Because if it's not practical, if it's not relatable, then it can be hard to see certain things in action with the certain privileges that we all do have.
Mhm.
So humor is really something that I like to leverage when making examples and sharing different things. And, as an example, being inclusive can mean so many different things, but one very simple example of being inclusive is saying, hey team, happy Friday. If the team is global and you've got different time zones, could be late evening, could be afternoon, could be morning. Happy Friday is a great way to make everyone feel included. Because if you're saying good morning, okay, well, you're only talking to people in your time zone, right? So there's just a lot of really nice ways to share stories, to make things light, and to share humor with the examples of teaching these concepts and really helping people to see those blind spots. So that helps a great deal.
Yeah, I one of some of my favorite calls, talking to somebody in Australia in our afternoon in Nashville, it's the next day in the morning there. And so just by taking the time to know what time it is when you're talking to people in dramatically different time zones and understanding, you can just see their faces brighten up. Like, oh, you took the time to understand. You get me. And it changes the tone of the conversation, makes it more open that I took the time to understand where they are in the world, not just who they are.
Yeah. And Chris, that's empathy. That's you caring enough to even take the initiative, knowing that someone has Diwali as a holiday coming up and wishing them well
Mhm.
because they're taking off work. That just shows that you care. The thing about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that it's not rocket science. It's not hard. It just takes effort. We
Mhm.
have to do a little bit extra. We have to care. We have to take a few extra steps, but it's always worth it. I mean, these are other people that we have to see every day at work. We want those positive connections and relationships. And so it's definitely worth the extra effort and time that you have to put in.
I think that's actually a great way to end this. That's great. Um, what's your closing thought, and how should people go about getting in touch with you?
Absolutely. So, closing thought is that every person has a level of privilege. It doesn't matter what your circumstances or who you are. You're one multidimensional, dynamic person with a lot of different things that make up your identity. We all have privilege, and when we all can identify how we can use our privilege to help others, that's where we will start to really see things change. A friend of mine told me once that in regards to voting about a particular issue, that it didn't apply to them. So they just were not going to vote, or they were just going to, randomly select something. If we all only care about the things that affect each of us, we will never see systemic change for the better. We have to be able to look at the world by acknowledging our privilege and setting it aside to use that privilege to help someone else that doesn't have that level of privilege that we have. And if we all collectively do that, things will be a lot better in almost every area of life, not just within the workplace. So in terms of getting in touch with me, we have a LinkedIn page, DEI Talent Partners. Our marketing team is currently redesigning our website. It will be up and running in the next several weeks here. So DEITalentPartners.com is the best way to find us.
Awesome. Well, Devoreaux, thank you so much for taking the time to connect today. I will encourage everyone to visit the website, find Devoreaux on LinkedIn, and get connected. So with that, thank you so much.